For over 3 decades now, whenever Jeff Goldblum told stories about making Jurassic Park, one memory always came up: before the dinosaurs, before Spielberg, before any of the groundbreaking effects that changed movies forever. A memory of exactly how Sam Neill used to make him laugh between takes on an island where none of them yet knew if any of it would actually work. Goldblum has told that story for 33 years. He's telling it again this week, except now it carries a weight it never used to have, because underneath that friendship sits a boy who spent nearly 14 years of his own childhood too afraid to speak at all. A wound so private that almost none of the people laughing along with him on that dinosaur island had any idea it existed. Sam was born on a kitchen table in Omagh, County Tyrone, Northern Ireland, on September 14th, 1947. Nigel John Dermot Neill, son of an English mother and a New Zealand father serving with the Irish Guards. When he was 7, the family emigrated to Christchurch, New Zealand, and, landing there with a plum in his voice and Nigel for a name, was, he later wrote, asking for trouble in a rough New Zealand playground. He picked up the nickname Sam to avoid confusion with a childhood friend also named Nigel, and it stuck for life. What almost nobody outside his closest circles understood for years was how much that transition actually cost him. Sam developed a severe stutter as a small boy, one serious enough that it swallowed most of his childhood whole. I spent most of my childhood hoping that people wouldn't talk to me so that I didn't have to talk back, he admitted decades later on Australian television, describing a silence that stretched on for nearly 14 years. Relief came gradually, first through an outward bound course, the kind of physically demanding program built around running across logs and falling into rivers, and then through debate and drama at university, where studying English literature led him into a production of Macbeth and into the realization that performing as someone else somehow loosened a voice that had stayed locked for over a decade. It was at Victoria University of Wellington, inside that same drama circle, that Sam met a fellow student named John Clark, a fast-talking young New Zealander who'd go on to become one of Australasia's most beloved satirists. Nobody in that university theater group could have known it then, but the friendship forming between them in the late 1960s would end up outlasting nearly every professional relationship either man built afterward. Decades later, they'd finally worked together on screen in the 1990 comedy Death in Brunswick, and Sam would call it probably the happiest experience I've ever had on a film, a remarkable claim from a man who by then had worked with Meryl Streep and Sean Connery. His screen career carried him a long way from that Christchurch playground, with an international breakthrough with Sleeping Dogs in 1977, leading roles in My Brilliant Career in 1979, and a screen test for James Bond that ultimately went to Timothy Dalton instead. Through all of it, his parents remained a steady, adored presence. And even decades after they'd both passed away, Sam kept speaking of them in the present tense in interviews, admitting simply that he adored them still. A quiet grief he rarely dwelt on publicly, but never fully set down either. Then came the run that made him a genuine leading man, a submarine officer in The Hunt for Red October, a paranoid husband in Dead Calm opposite a young Nicole Kidman, and Holly Hunter's silent husband in The Piano. Kidman was only 18 when they made Dead Calm, and remembering him this week, she said Sam had taken her under his wing on that shoot, and they'd stayed friends for life. It was on that set in 1989 that Sam met makeup artist Noriko Watanabe. "I opened the door and I thought, oh my God," he admitted. They married that year, and daughter Elena arrived in 1991, joining son Tim, born in 1983, to actress Lisa Harrow. There was an earlier chapter, too, one Sam kept almost entirely private for over 2 decades. In his early 20s, long before fame, long before any kind of stable life at all, he'd fathered a son who was placed for adoption. Father and son didn't find each other again until 1994, a reunion Sam treated with the same quiet discretion he brought to most of his private life, a second chance at fatherhood that arrived decades later than either of them could have planned for. Sam opened his own memoir with a memory of Elena as a small child, a teacher asking her class what each parent did for work. When it came to describing her famous actor father, Elena's answer was, Sam wrote, both perceptive and entirely accurate. "My daddy sits in caravans," she said, meaning trailers, meaning the endless hours actors spend waiting on set. When Elena later developed a stutter of her own, a speech therapist asked immediately whether either parent had stuttered, and Sam, who'd kept his own struggle mostly private for decades, found himself explaining it out loud for the first time. "It's more or less an inherited condition," the therapist told him, news to him even after living with it his whole life. He became one of the most openly candid public figures anywhere on the subject, decades before that kind of openness was common. Off camera, Sam built a second life that mattered just as much to him as any role. In 1993, the same year Jurassic Park made him a household name, he founded Two Paddocks, a vineyard in central Otago on land tied to his own family history, counting his very first grapes the same year he was chasing dinosaurs through a Hawaiian jungle for Spielberg. "My wine has many more dimensions than I could possibly aspire to have," he told one interviewer, and on Australian television, promoting a Pinot Noir with a straight face, he simply called it sex in a glass. The farm later became a second, unexpected source of fame as he shared videos of the animals living there online, naming them after famous friends, a lamb for Meryl Streep and another for Michael Caine. That same unbothered confidence carried into his politics, too, which he never hid despite decades of advice most actors receive to stay quiet, becoming, in his final years, an outspoken opponent of a proposed gold mine near his own vineyards, a stance that earned him a public rebuke from a sitting government minister. Sam didn't back down. Then came 2017, a year Sam later described as one of the hardest of his adult life. His marriage to Noriko quietly ended in separation after nearly 3 decades, and that same year, on April 9th, his oldest friend in the world, the same John Clark who'd shared a drama circle with him back in the 1960s, collapsed of a sudden heart attack while bushwalking in Australia, 68 years old, gone without warning. Sam's response, posted within hours, remains one of the rawest things he ever put his name to. "My dear old friend John Clark has died," he wrote.
I cannot speak. A devastating sentence from a man who'd spent his whole public life talking openly about nearly everything, including the very speech impediment that phrase seems to echo without ever naming it. Nearly 50 years of shared jokes and shared sets reduced in that moment to 5 words and a full stop. His career only kept widening after that. A tormented wizard in Merlin, the menacing Major Chester Campbell in Peaky Blinders, and Cardinal Wolsey in The Tudors. Then, in 2022, while promoting Jurassic World Dominion, Sam noticed swollen glands. Doctors initially suspected were from undetected COVID. Further tests revealed stage 3 angioimmunoblastic T-cell lymphoma, a rare, aggressive blood cancer. "I'm Crook," he wrote bluntly when he began what became his memoir. "Possibly dying. I may have to speed this up." He never bothered learning the precise medical term for his own cancer, preferring instead the description his friend Stephen Fry offered him, calling it simply the horse and pisser. His first round of chemotherapy failed, and doctors moved him onto an experimental drug under an unusual arrangement, treatment-free if he was still alive 4 months later. He was. By his 4th scan, doctors confirmed full remission, and Sam wrote, with evident relief, "I'm a living man, with every intent of going on living and living." In one of his last major interviews with The Guardian, he said it plainly, "I'm not afraid to die, but it would annoy me, because I'd really like another decade or 2. I've got my lovely little grandchildren. I want to see them get big." Which brings the story to the friendship that carried him through nearly all of it, the one that started on a fake dinosaur island in 1993 and never actually stopped.
Sam Neill and Jeff Goldblum met on the original Jurassic Park, playing Dr. Alan Grant and Dr. Ian Malcolm opposite each other, and the bond between them nearly ended before it properly began. In September of 1992, while the production was still shooting on the Hawaiian island of Kauai, Hurricane Iniki tore directly through their location, a storm serious enough that Sam later said the entire cast and crew genuinely believed it might kill them. "We all became very close, surviving Hurricane Iniki," Sam told The Hollywood Reporter years afterward, recalling 3 tense weeks on the island before nature destroyed their sets and forced everyone to flee back to Los Angeles. That kind of shared fear has a way of collapsing the usual distance between co-stars fast, and it left Sam and Jeff with something most working relationships never get the chance to build: real trust, earned under real pressure, long before either of them understood how big the finished film would actually become. It's the kind of story that never makes it into a franchise retrospective. 3 grown adults genuinely frightened together in a hotel while a Category 4 hurricane dismantled the sets they'd spent months building, and somehow coming out the other side closer for it. The friendship that followed was built as much on comedy as on crisis. Sam has said for years that he finds Jeff immensely entertaining, someone who could turn even the dullest stretch of downtime into something worth remembering. That reputation got tested properly during the making of Jurassic World Dominion in 2020, when COVID protocols locked the returning cast inside strict quarantine. Unable to leave their hotel or travel anywhere near London for months at a time, Bryce Dallas Howard, who lived through the same bubble, later described spending 4.5 months in a hotel just minutes from set, and Sam credited Jeff directly with making that stretch survivable. It was a lot of fun to have someone who can get on the piano and have a bit of a sing-along. Maybe a dance or two, Sam said, joking that between Jeff and the rest of their beleaguered little group, they had to provide their own entertainment since there was nowhere else to go. What more fun could you have, he added, than Jeff Goldblum and all those other idiots? Those piano sessions weren't just talk either. Video clips surfaced from that same quarantine of the two of them at the keys together, trading verses of the old standard, "I Remember You," a private joke between friends that quietly became public proof of exactly how close they'd grown. Sam's own descriptions of Jeff carried a specific teasing affection that only decades of friendship earn. "Ian Malcolm brings out the worst in Alan Grant," he joked to one interviewer, explaining that his character stayed quietly jealous of how effortlessly cool Malcolm always seemed, swivel hips and all, while Grant remained just an old paleontologist who'd never once been accused of coolness in his life. Off-screen, the joke ran the other way just as easily. When Jeff's birthday rolled around one year, Sam posted a photo of himself beside a matching pair of Funko Pop figures, his own perfectly ordinary Alan Grant pose next to Jeff's far cheekier Ian Malcolm collectible, captioning it, "Happy Birthday," to his cute mantelpiece avatar and to Jeff's own, more R-rated one. He even needled Jeff about their diverging lifestyles, noting that despite 3 decades of friendship and 30 years running his own vineyard, neither Jeff nor Laura Dern had ever really taken to wine, joking that they were smoothie people, cold-pressed juice people, disappointingly uninterested in everything two paddocks had to offer. It's a small, silly detail, but it captures something real about the shape their friendship actually took over 3 decades, not built on shared habits or even shared taste, but on the simple, durable fact that they made each other laugh consistently for over 30 years across a hurricane, a global pandemic, and every ordinary stretch of time in between. That closeness meant Jeff was among the very first people Sam told when the cancer diagnosis arrived. He shared it with us early on. Jeff later confirmed publicly, adding that Sam stayed in constant touch with him throughout treatment, that he looked fantastic, and that he sounded great, and that Jeff simply adored him. When Dominion finally reunited, the 3 original stars on screen, for the first time in almost 30 years, Jeff described the whole experience with a warmth that went well past ordinary press tour enthusiasm, comparing it to a high school reunion he'd never actually attended, but felt certain couldn't possibly measure up. "We had such an unforgettable, life-changing time," he said, explaining that the friendship built on that very first film had changed his life just as much as the movie itself had, and that seeing Sam and Laura's excited faces again after everything, after decades, after a hurricane and a pandemic, and now a cancer diagnosis quietly working in the background, really was unbelievable. On July 13th, 2026, Sam Neill died suddenly in Sydney, surrounded by his family, still cancer-free. The illness that had shaped his final years was never actually the thing that took him. Word reached Jeff within hours, and what he chose to share back wasn't a formal statement written by anyone but himself. He posted the video Bryce Dallas Howard had filmed months earlier. The 3 of them were crowded around a piano, during that same COVID quarantine that had once tested and deepened their friendship. Sam and Laura leaning in close beside him, all three voices loose and unguarded, singing the Beatles' Blackbird together, like they had nowhere else in the world they'd rather be. Underneath it, Jeff wrote only one line: "The next great adventure begins. Love, always and forever. A farewell built entirely out of a memory rather than a headline. Exactly the kind of tribute a man who valued piano sing-alongs over grand speeches would choose to leave behind." He didn't stop there. In the days since, Jeff has spoken about Sam the same unguarded way he always did, without pretense, without the practiced distance actors often keep around a colleague's death. He's called him a treasure, a mischief maker, a man impossible not to adore, with language identical to what he used describing Sam while he was still very much alive. Proof that nothing about Jeff's affection for him was ever performed for cameras in the first place. Laura Dern, who'd survived that same hurricane and that same quarantine hotel alongside them, added her own words that week, calling Sam a true and noble gentleman, wrapped up in her dream leading man, promising she'd love him forever as her Dr. Alan Grant. Even Steven Spielberg, the director who first placed all three of them on that island together back in 1993, wrote that he adored making every Jurassic film with Sam, remembering specifically how strange it always was watching a man that gentle, that devoted to his own children, convincingly play someone irritated by kids on screen. A small, telling contradiction that made his performance work precisely because it ran against his true nature. For an audience that had spent 3 decades watching Alan Grant and Ian Malcolm bicker their way through dinosaur chaos on screen, that final piano video offered something far more honest than any scripted scene the franchise ever gave them. 2 old friends and the woman who'd survived a hurricane, a pandemic, and 30 years apart, right alongside them, simply saying goodbye the way they'd always found each other, through a song neither of them needed to rehearse. It wasn't staged, it wasn't written by a room full of screenwriters, and it didn't need to be, because by that point, Jeff, Sam, and Laura had spent 33 years proving that whatever bonded them in front of Spielberg's cameras had never actually needed a script in the first place. From a hurricane on Kauai to a quarantine hotel decades later to one final quiet piano video, the story of that friendship kept writing itself entirely on its own terms, right up to the very end. What's the Sam Neill role, with a small human detail about his life that's staying with you the longest right now? Tell us honestly in the comments below what stays with you most tonight. We're reading every single one this week.